Good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forums webinar and podcast series featuring talks from Middle East Forums projects. My name is Dexter Van Zyl, Managing Editor of Focus on Western Islamism, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. Today's guest is Collin May, an attorney in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Collin was director of the Alberta Human Rights Commission, AHRC, in Alberta until his positive review of a book by Middle East Forum's Efraim Karsh caused him to be ousted in September of 2022 on the grounds of Islamophobia. He is now suing the province of Alberta, charging that his ouster had nothing to do with the book review, but had more to do with political machinations to get him out of his position to protect people from investigation at the AHRC. This raises a number of questions. How has Islamophobia become a tool of political warfare available to everyone in Western democracies, not just Islamists? And what impact does May's ouster have on free speech in Canada, and what can be done? At the outset, I have two things to say. First of all, I want to encourage our viewers to post questions in the Q&A window on Zoom. And also, one of the things at FWI, if you look at our website, you'll see that we typically put quotation marks around the word Islamophobia, largely as a consequence or an attempt to kind of differentiate from legitimate concerns about anti-Muslim bigotry, because essentially at FWI, and I think the Middle East Forum generally, we regard the accusation of Islamophobia as an attempt to essentially stifle legitimate discussion about Islamism, Islam in the modern world. So with that, good afternoon, Collin.
Good afternoon. How are you, Dexter? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's good to have you. Can you briefly describe what happened in mid-22 when a blogger dredged up a 13-year-old book review you had written of Efraim Karsh's text, Islamic imperialism? What happened?
Well, it was, I guess we start with, I had written this book review 13 years earlier. It was an academic book review the journal is not an academic journal, it's not a peer-reviewed journal, but I have written in peer-reviewed journals, but it was just a book review. And a little bit of history for me. I attended Harvard, where I studied medieval Islamic philosophy under Muhsin Mahdi. I studied integration of immigrant communities in Paris when I was doing my diplôme d'études approfondies there. And I studied with Dominique Schnapper, a well-known sociologist and daughter of Raymond Aron. And so I have some background in this area. And so what I had done, I'd written this book review. It was put online 13 years earlier, before this came out in 2009. Nobody made a sound about it. It was just another book review by some guy who's, some academic type fellow. And I was a student in law school at the time. But then 13 years later, I was appointed on May 25th, 2022 as the chief of the Alberta Human Rights Commission after having served as 3 years as a part-time commissioner and having written over 40 decisions that were published. And there was a little bit of an attack on my credentials to start with, but not much. But then suddenly at the beginning of July 2022, a blogger who's affiliated with the opposition party, New Democratic Party here in Alberta, somehow got a hold of this piece, which actually wasn't available very easily anymore online. But he decided to write his story about it. And of course, I have to be a little careful here because in addition to my wrongful dismissal suit against the Alberta government, I will eventually be filing a defamation lawsuit. So some of these people I'm talking about will be defendants. So I can't say too much. But what I can say is that it was it was misrepresented. It was treated as some sort of effort to attack Muslims generally, especially Muslims in Canada, where they are minorities. And in fact, the review and the book entirely is about Muslim majority countries, about the political dynamics there, the history of Islam, its imperial background, through the various caliphates that have come forward since the Prophet's time. And what then happened was I was accused by the opposition based upon this misreading or this mispresentation by the blogger of being Islamophobic, of racist, and of contributing to violence against Black Muslim women in Canada, all of which was absolutely ridiculous accusation. But those were the accusations that were made against me. The government made some efforts to defend me, but what I discovered through the process, and of course there was the National Council of Canadian Muslims became involved, demanding an apology from me. I wasn't going to give one, but I did make a statement trying to assuage concerns. But once the cat's out of the bag on these things, once you've been accused, you're finished, really. There's nothing you can do. You could apologize, you could bow down before as many authorities as you want, but ultimately, because I was accused of not having met with enough Muslim groups to seek their forgiveness. Apparently, forgiveness was a word. I was supposed to seek forgiveness for what I'd done, and ultimately, the government decided to let me go. So I was there for 2 months. 2 months of dealing with these accusations, trying to reform an organization which I was soon to learn had significant management problems, significant issues of sexual harassment had been raised of staff against other staff. And a lot of that, as I'm learning just today, the former head of my predecessor, who was appointed by the New Democratic Party, is now being investigated for issues of bullying and mistreatment of staff in his new job. So all of this is coming together, but suffice to say, I was taken out on the basis of Islamophobia.
Now, one of the things that I've looked at the record pretty closely is that essentially it seems as if the initial allegation of Islamophobia was not leveled by Muslims and didn't have anything to do with any concern about the safety or welfare of Muslims. It was, I mean, that was the stated interest, but those concerns were not leveled by Muslims themselves, but basically by officials within the NDP. So it seems like you're indicating that this weapon of Islamophobia was instrumentalized, or this accusation was used as a weapon by non-Muslims to go after one of their rivals in the political sphere.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, that's how it appeared at first. As I said, it was NDP and their allies who really, and not Muslims, although it was a Muslim MLA for the NDP who, led the charge against me, which that seems, it's all plausible that they would do it that way. But yeah, it was very much appeared as a political attack first. And it was this Muslim NDP MLA who called me the writings Islamophobic. And as this went on, he eventually referred to Efraim Karsh's book as being Islamophobic, which is a pretty hefty accusation to make against somebody as renowned as him. But yeah, it was a political thing.
Now, one of the things that I did was I looked at some of the reviews of Dr. Karsh's text that had been published long before anything that you had written or even subsequent to, and there was never any hint of the accusation of Islamophobia leveled at Dr. Karsh or his text by these experts. And so I guess at this point, what type of, do you think that this is going to hinder people's ability to speak openly about issues related to Islamism, Islam, and Muslims in general?
Well, absolutely, I think so. Because, I mean, having done so, you see now what's happened to me. I've lost my livelihood. I haven't had a job since I was fired. It's had a massive impact on my reputation, which was before spotless. I was well respected in the legal community, in the academic community. I'm having to reconstitute all of that. And I think, yeah, absolutely. A few years ago, there was a non-binding statement made by Canada's House of Commons opposing Islamophobia in light of some murders that had happened in a mosque in Quebec. And there was raised at the time, well, it was people raised the concern that, well, if we say specifically this is all Islamophobia, then legitimate criticisms of, for instance, leaders of Muslim countries in the Middle East or of Islam as a doctrine will come under this attack of being called Islamophobic. And that's exactly what's happened to me. And at the time, everybody said, oh, no, that won't happen. And well, here we are. It has happened. And that's not to discount the fact that there does seem to be a rise in some hate crimes against Muslims in Canada. And we can't discount that. I've never done that. I think that's absolutely should not be happening. But it's certainly being used, I think, in my case, to silence me for a political purpose. And then to prevent anybody from criticizing, for instance, a Muslim leader in Iran. How would you even do that without being accused of attacking Muslims in Canada, which of course I never even discussed at all in the book review, and Dr. Karsh never mentioned Muslims as minorities in other countries in the West.
Okay, now one of the things that I've seen in the record that you've mentioned is that the people who are responsible for leveling these charges, they knew you individually. They knew you had actually interacted with them, and it seems to I'm led to believe that they had reason to believe that you were essentially not an Islamophobe, that you were essentially, like, for lack of a better word, a good guy that was committed to the goals of the AHRC, and essentially you wanted to make Canada work, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rachel Notley, who's the leader of the New Democratic Party, former premier and running for premier again this month, worked closely with my partner. He was her tour and scheduling director when she was premier in Southern Alberta. I attended Efraim Sabir, who made these accusations against me. I was at a birthday dinner for him in 2019 with Rachel Notley there. I've ridden in the Premier's Suburban with Rachel Notley with her security staff. I know her very well, and she knew my partner extremely well. And at no point did they ever say they had any concerns about me or anything that I had said. And in fact, they knew I was involved in some work in health equity. Especially, I work a lot in health equity for Indigenous and elderly patients. That was supposed to move ahead at the University of Calgary. That got put off because of this. But absolutely, I know these people well. So it's a very personal attack.
Okay, now I guess what advice would you have for people who are subjected to this type of critique or this accusation? What's your advice to them?
Well, I think what's expected in these sorts of things is you do your mea culpa, you apologize, and then you go and you bow before the people you've apparently harmed and injured. And even then, it rarely produces any good result. My response is fight back. I think we do have to fight back. We have to talk about, and this wasn't just an issue of freedom of speech, it was academic freedom as well, because this was an academic commentary. But my problem was, when you're chief of the Alberta Human Rights Commission, it's very much like being a judge. So you don't defend yourself publicly. It's standard that you're not going to go out there and say, no, I'm this and that, or because you'll start to be seen to be biased. And of course, that's the one thing we're not supposed to be. So I didn't have an opportunity to adequately defend myself. And Rachel Notley, who's a lawyer herself, Efraim Sabir, who's a lawyer, knew this. They knew that I couldn't defend myself the way I could have, say I had been a politician and I wanted to fight back. But I think you have to stand up to this, and you have to do it reasonably and thoughtfully. And this is I think, a real threat and having seen it here in Alberta, Albertans have never seen anything like this before. It's never happened in Alberta before. And I think most people don't pay a lot of attention to it. And unfortunately, even when you're working for the government too, and they don't want you to say a lot. They, of course, have their own political interests to defend. They wanted to be seen to be responding to the Muslim community, which I understand. But I think if this happens to you, even if you're in a position like I was, I think you do need to defend yourself.
Okay, now one of the issues that I was thinking about or that I saw is that while the initial accusation was leveled by the NDP, essentially it looks as if, and I don't want to overstate the case, but it seems as if essentially the NCCM eventually they kind of had to take over basically managing the accusation against you. Because once the accusation was leveled against you, they had an interest in making sure that the accusation was capable of destroying its target, because the ability to level that accusation is frankly a political asset that needs to be protected. Did you see a shift from the NDP to the NCCM as time passed?
Yeah, absolutely. But the NDP, you have to understand, because we were so well known, my partner and I, by New Democrats, many of them reached out to defend us and went to their party and said, stop this, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. So it was clear that the NDP were kind of in a catch-22. They tried to really launch a strong attack. They got surprised, I think, or blindsided by the fact that so many of their own members pulled back. So then they didn't push it a lot. Only Irfan Sabir kind of tried to keep it going. But then, as you say, it became more the NCCM who were saying I hadn't been proactive enough or prioritized meeting with the Muslim community. What the NCCM didn't know is I'd actually met with some Muslims who were representative of a couple communities who gave me some other information. But the NCCM did want to portray themselves as the arbiter of all things Muslim and as the representative of a number of Muslim groups. So as you say, it's an asset for them. They are a lobby group. They try to get, advance their agenda with the government. So it's certainly in their interest to be seen by the Muslim community or sectors of it as being able to achieve certain things, and removing me was one of the achievements they wanted to see.
Okay. Now, in the question and answer, we have some, JL has asked, have you been blackballed from finding further employment, or have you been able to find a job since you were unfairly fired? And you've already addressed that, but can you talk a little bit more explicitly about your crucifixion?
Yeah, I would say I have been blackballed. I've applied for some jobs, basically been ignored, jobs I'm qualified for. I have applied to get on a board of an organization. And I mean, many of them are upfront with, and the organization deals with people who suffer, who have HIV, and who advocating for people with HIV, and it's an issue. You can't help get around it. As I said, the University of Calgary was going to bring me on, or at least I was going to proceed with an application to become an adjunct professor there at their medical school, because I have some background in secondary trauma caused by complaints processes following adverse medical events. And that was stalled. And it's sort of back, we're working on it again. But all of those things certainly have put a hold on my life. And I haven't had an income now since September. And it's difficult. Law firms are a bit jittery about bringing on some guy who's suing the government. And but this is the other problem, is you end up, because you're so harmed, you have to resort to these legal measures, but they take a long time, they cost a lot of money, and in the meantime, it's difficult to get employment when people know you're engaged in this litigation.
Okay. Now, one of the questions that we have in the Q&A is, what is the current status of your lawsuit? What's going on? When do you think it'll be adjudicated?
The wrongful dismissal suit we're going back and forth with the government, so I won't talk too much about it. Wrongful dismissal suits usually settle before you go to trial. So we're hopeful that will happen. And I'm not hostile towards the Alberta government and the governing party right now. So I'm hoping that we'll come to some arrangement. I haven't filed the defamation lawsuit yet. I did file what are called notices of defamation on media outlets, which you have to do within 3 months of them publishing. But I haven't filed the actual lawsuit yet. I'm expecting that will come perhaps fairly soon, maybe in the next few weeks, but maybe, and of course, all of this is going on now with an election in Alberta on May 29th to decide whether Rachel Notley comes back as premier or we keep the one we've got. So there's this sort of political background that I'm dealing with as well. But yeah, we're moving ahead as much as we can, but it takes time.
Now, another question is, are special cutouts, special privileges and exemptions being made for Muslims under Canadian law? And are there ever cutouts made for groups regarded as friendly, or are they only regarded for offered to groups viewed as oppressed and usable against Western society?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's really cutouts. I think, as I said, there has been some violence against some Muslims, so I think that's certainly there. But it probably is a concern that once the House of Commons has said we have to combat Islamophobia, and they have said they have to combat anti-Semitism and other things in the past, they've combat violence against Uyghurs and against Kurds and Yazidis and that sort of thing. But once you've named that and said this exists and sort of given it this broad scope, sure, I think it's going to be difficult. As I said, I would have been the first chief of the Alberta Human Rights Commission to have this broad knowledge about Islam, its history, its philosophers. As I said, I studied Farabi and Averroes and Avicenna. So I have that background. I think, unfortunately, it would have been very useful for me to be in that position, especially with what has been happening to the Muslims. And unfortunately, that's all gone now.
Yeah, now, is there an element of the boy who cried wolf? Because it looks as if this accusation was leveled for a particularly shameless and obvious reason. But there is a legitimate concern, and human rights organizations and civil society organizations have a legitimate concern about bigotry of all types: anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Jewish bigotry, bigotry against any community. But the thing is that because this allegation was leveled in such kind of an obviously political manner, that essentially now the next time that it is leveled at somebody that may in fact be attempting to incite hostility and undermine the welfare of Muslims in Canada, will it be harder for people to actually stand up in defense of legitimate interests?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it will depend. These things, have a rhythm to them. There is now more concern about violence against Muslims in Canada. But when you make these false claims, as you say, the boy that cries wolf, and it starts to become more obvious that this has happened and people learn more about it, I think that certainly makes it difficult. I mean, and that's why I think it's such an improper use of language and of these accusations to associate what I had written with violence against Black Muslim women, kind of using, and they were using the whole intersectionality approach to try to get the most oppressed looking person they could find. But yeah, absolutely, I think this will harm Muslims. In fact, there was a case that was brought by a fellow who was a respondent at the Human Rights Commission, and there were some women who had made complaints against him for being discriminating on the basis of gender, and it's now he brought a lawsuit against the Human Rights Commission for having listened to them. So you're already getting this sort of lawfare approach to matters that should be dealt with could be dealt with in mediation, but now are turning into really aggressive accusations back and forth that won't help anybody. They won't help Muslims. They won't help the women who made, in this particular case, who made those accusations, and even myself. And this is something that did come up. It was revealed that I'm an openly gay man, so I have some interest in certain elements of human rights, and it, even that was sort of turned against me. What does that matter? People were saying that. So I think it's very much turning things into a war of one group against another group, and that's what absolutely should not have happened.
Now, is there a sense within Canadian intellectual life that maybe we should just start to emphasize individual rights and freedoms, and kind of lay off the whole concern about group identity? And when those individual rights and freedoms are essentially violated because of some sort of group identity, that's a legitimate intervention. But the idea that you need to kind of protect groups in general, as opposed to individual rights, are people thinking about that?
No, I don't think so. And I think, unfortunately, we're probably going a little bit in the other direction. There was a professor in Canada here, a political science professor, chair of a political science department, who wrote an article in my defense, but in an American magazine. I think right now Canadians aren't thinking of that. They aren't thinking of, Canadians have valued the idea of multiculturalism for a long time, but multiculturalism has undergone massive changes from what it used to mean to what it's becoming now. And that, the idea that we have to protect or call out people or put fences up around certain communities so there's absolutely no criticism of their actions, that's become the model, I think. Now, academics, I think, do their work. Some may think we maybe do need to make a change here. Hopefully my case would cause us to review that. We haven't gotten there yet because it hasn't been, too widely dealt with yet. We're still in early litigation phase. But right now, I'm worried that in Canada, that's not the case. There was recently a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University who received government funding to just put together what she called a list of people that are part of the Islamophobia industry. I have serious doubts about just making up a list and calling people names. What is the academic benefit of something like that? So I think that's concerning. And I'm afraid that's where we may be for now, but hopefully we'll get out of that position.
Now, there's one last question in the Q&A that said, they were curious at the provincial level, what policies did they use to essentially dismiss you from your post? Was there any specific policy that they invoked, or was it just the feeling of views that what you had written was Islamophobic?
Actually, nothing. I was let go without cause. That's the official version. They didn't give me any reason for why they ultimately, in a legal sense, why they terminated me. I have no reason.
Wow.
So I can't say, I was just removed without cause.
All right. Well, on that, I think we're going to, it's like reading Kafka.
Yeah.
And
I think I can certainly speculate whave but I've seen some of the documents. Obviously, we've had some disclosure, and as far as they might have wanted to say something, but in the end, there was no reason ever given.
All right. Now, the person who asked that question just typed "wow" in the Q&A, and that is exactly my response.
Yeah.
And on that, I want to thank everyone. I think that's about all the time that we've got today. And I want to thank everyone for attending and encourage them to look for the information about next week's webinars in their inboxes in their mail or in their email. And I want to thank our guests and Collin May and the people who attended. And I wish everyone a very good weekend. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.